It was a quiet afternoon at the Grand Maple Hotel in downtown Chicago. The lobby bustled with travelers checking in, business people rushing to meetings, and families on vacation. Among them, a man walked in, holding the hand of a small child. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just another guest. But as Emily Carter, the front desk attendant, observed them closely, a strange feeling crept over her. Something wasn't right. Emily had worked at the Grand Maple Hotel for nearly 5 years, and in that time she had seen all kinds of guests. Families on road trips, exhausted business travelers, even the occasional celebrity. But something about this man made her uneasy. He was tall, dressed in an oversized jacket despite the warm spring weather. His face was partially hidden under the brim of a baseball cap, and his eyes darted around the lobby as if searching for something or someone. The child, a little girl no older than 5, clutched his hand but didn't lean into him the way most children did with a parent. She wasn't crying, but her expression was eerily blank, her small shoulders tense. Emily glanced at her coworker, Jake, who was helping another guest. When he caught her eye, she subtly nodded toward the man. Jake raised an eyebrow, sensing her concern, but kept his voice neutral. "Welcome to the Grand Maple Hotel. Checking in?" Emily asked, forcing a polite smile. The man hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, 1 room, just for the night." His voice was gruff and he avoided eye contact. Emily's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she glanced at the little girl. She was holding a stuffed bunny, its fur worn and slightly dirty, but she didn't cling to it the way most children did with their favorite toys. Instead, she held it limply at her side, as if it had been placed in her hand rather than hugged close. Emily's heart tightened. Something wasn't right. Trying to keep her voice steady, she asked, "And may I have your ID, sir?" The man hesitated again. His grip on the little girl's hand tightened. She winced but didn't make a sound. Emily felt her pulse quicken. She had taken training sessions on human trafficking awareness, and the small details she had been taught to notice were all lining up now. A child who wasn't interacting naturally with an adult. A guest unwilling to make eye contact. A rush to check in without much conversation. She glanced toward Jake again, this time tapping her fingers lightly against the desk. A silent signal they had practiced for emergencies. Jake immediately picked up the phone. "Security, we have a possible situation in the lobby," he said calmly, as if he were making a routine call. The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the exit. Emily knew she had only seconds before he might try to leave. She looked down at the little girl and, keeping her voice soft, asked, "Sweetheart, what's your name?" For the first time, the child's eyes flickered with something. Fear, hesitation. She opened her mouth slightly but didn't speak. The man pulled her closer. "She's shy," he muttered. Emily didn't believe him. A slow, tense silence hung in the air. Then, just as security entered the lobby, the little girl took a small, trembling step backward, away from the man. And in that moment, Emily knew she had done the right thing. Emily's breath caught as the little girl took that tiny step backward. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to tell her that the child wasn't with someone she trusted. The man noticed it too, his jaw clenched, his grip tightening on the girl's wrist. "Come on," he muttered, starting to turn toward the door. Emily knew she couldn't let them leave. "Sir," she said quickly, keeping her voice light and professional, "I just need to confirm your reservation before you go. Can you spell your last name for me?" She wasn't actually trying to book him a room. She just needed to stall. The hotel's security team, led by Officer Grant, was already moving in from the back hallway. The man hesitated. His foot shifted toward the door, his muscles tensed as if preparing to run. Then the little girl did something unexpected. She turned to Emily and, in the softest whisper, said, "Help me." Emily's stomach dropped. It was barely audible, but she heard it. And from the way the man's face darkened, he had heard it too. "Let's go," he snapped, yanking the girl's arm harder this time. Emily's body moved before her mind could catch up. She stepped out from behind the desk, blocking his path. "Sir," she said, her voice firmer now, "I'm going to have to ask you to wait a moment." He glared at her, his free hand curling into a fist. "Move." Emily didn't. Neither did Jake, who had subtly edged closer. Behind them, Officer Grant and another security guard were just a few steps away. Then came the moment Emily had feared. The man let go of the girl's wrist, only to shove Emily aside and bolt toward the door. "Stop him!" Jake shouted. Grant was fast, but the man was faster. He pushed past a guest walking in, knocking over a luggage cart as he sprinted toward the exit. But he had made one mistake. He had let go of the girl. Emily dropped to her knees, steadying the child, who was shaking but unhurt. "It's okay," she whispered, wrapping a protective arm around her. Outside, the street was chaotic. The man had made it out the front doors, but security was right behind him. A hotel valet, catching on to what was happening, stuck out his foot just as the man ran past. The man stumbled just enough for Grant to lunge. A scuffle, shouts, a pair of handcuffs clicking shut, and then it was over. Inside, the little girl buried her face into Emily's shoulder, her tiny body trembling. "You're safe now," Emily murmured, stroking the child's hair. "You're safe." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. But Emily wasn't thinking about the man anymore. She was thinking about the girl, and the fact that she had almost walked out of this hotel with no one to stop her. As the police officers stormed into the lobby, Emily felt the little girl's grip on her tighten. The child was trembling, her small hands clutching Emily's uniform as if letting go would mean being pulled back into the nightmare she had just escaped. "It's okay, sweetheart," Emily whispered, brushing a strand of messy blonde hair from the girl's forehead. "You're safe now." Officer Grant gave a quick nod to Emily before stepping outside to help the other officers secure the suspect. A tall, sharp-eyed policewoman crouched beside them, speaking in a voice as gentle as the moment required. "Hi there, sweetie. My name's Officer Riley," she said, keeping her distance so she wouldn't startle the child. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I just want to make sure you're okay. Can you tell me your name?" The girl buried her face deeper into Emily's shoulder. She didn't speak, but her breathing was quick, unsteady. Emily met Officer Riley's gaze. She whispered, "Help me," before he tried to take her. She explained, her voice quieter now. "I don't think they're related." Riley nodded, her face darkening. "That's what we're afraid of." Outside, the commotion had drawn a small crowd. The man, now in handcuffs, was shoved into the back of a patrol car. His shouts were muffled behind the glass, but Emily could still make out the rage in his eyes as he thrashed against the seat. "I didn't do anything. She's my niece," he barked, twisting against the restraints. "This is a mistake." But Officer Grant wasn't buying it. "Then you won't mind explaining everything at the station." Emily turned her attention back to the girl. She was still shaking, her little fingers gripping Emily's sleeve. "Hey," Emily whispered, gently rubbing the child's back. "You don't have to say anything, okay? We're just happy you're safe." For the first time, the girl tilted her head slightly upward, her wide, glassy eyes locking onto Emily's. Then, in the softest, most fragile voice, she murmured, "He's not my uncle." Emily's heart clenched. She had already known it deep down, but hearing the confirmation sent a wave of cold rage through her. How many times had this child tried to tell someone before? How long had she been waiting for someone to notice? Officer Riley softened her voice. "Do you know your real name, sweetie?" The girl hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Sophie." Emily swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "That's a beautiful name, Sophie," she said, offering the gentlest smile she could. The little girl hesitated again. Then, in a voice so broken yet full of hope, she asked, "Am I going home now?" Emily blinked back the sting of tears. Officer Riley's expression remained composed, but the weight of the question was heavy. "We're going to find out exactly where home is, sweetheart, and we're going to make sure you get there safely." Sophie bit her lip, as if unsure whether to believe those words. Emily gave her a reassuring squeeze. "I promise you're not alone anymore." For the first time since she had walked into the hotel, Sophie exhaled a shaky breath that sounded almost like relief. Outside, the man who had tried to take her was driven away, his shouts growing distant. The crowd dispersed, the lobby returned to normal, but Emily knew nothing about this moment would ever be forgotten. Because today a little girl had been saved. And maybe, just maybe, Emily had changed the course of her life forever. As the police car disappeared down the street, Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The hotel lobby had returned to its usual rhythm. Guests checking in, staff moving efficiently, but for her, nothing felt the same. Sophie was still clinging to her, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of Emily's uniform as if she was afraid she might vanish too. Officer Riley remained beside them, giving the child time to breathe, to process. "Emily," Riley said softly, "would you mind staying with Sophie a little longer? We have a child protection unit on the way, but I think she feels safest with you right now." Emily looked down at Sophie, whose wide blue eyes were filled with uncertainty. The little girl wasn't crying, but the weight of everything she had been through was in every trembling breath. "Of course," Emily said without hesitation. Riley offered a grateful nod before stepping away to make a call. Emily turned her attention back to Sophie, crouching down to meet her at eye level. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently. "Would you like to sit somewhere quieter? Maybe have some hot chocolate?" Sophie hesitated, then gave a small nod. Emily took her hand, leading her toward the staff lounge, a small but cozy space tucked behind the front desk. Jake had already rushed ahead, preparing a cup of warm cocoa and placing a soft blanket over one of the chairs. As Sophie climbed onto the chair, Emily sat beside her. "Do you want to tell me anything? Or do you just want to sit for a while?" she asked, giving the child the space to decide. Sophie wrapped her hands around the warm mug but didn't drink. After a long silence, she whispered, "He took me." Emily's chest tightened. "The man from earlier?" Sophie nodded, staring at the steam rising from her cocoa. "I don't know him. I don't know where he was taking me." Emily fought to keep her emotions in check. She wanted to reach for her, to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay. But she knew Sophie needed more than comfort. She needed someone to listen. "Do you remember where you were before?" Emily asked softly. Sophie swallowed hard. "I was at the park with my mom." Her voice trembled now. "She let go of my hand for just a second, and then I was gone." Emily's breath hitched. A missing child. Sophie had been taken from a park, probably no more than a day or two ago. Her mother must be out there, desperate, searching, terrified. Emily reached out, placing a steady hand over Sophie's. "Sophie, listen to me," she said firmly but gently. "We're going to find your mom. The police are already looking for her. I promise you won't be alone." Sophie's lower lip quivered. "What if she doesn't find me?" Emily squeezed her hand. "She will. And until then, I'm right here." Just then, Officer Riley stepped back in, her phone still in hand. There was a new look in her eyes, one that sent a wave of hope through Emily's chest. "We found her mother," Riley said. Sophie's head shot up. "Mommy!" "She's been looking for you since the moment you disappeared," Riley confirmed, kneeling beside her. "She never stopped." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. "She's coming?" Riley smiled. "She's on her way right now." Sophie made a small, choked sound, half a sob, half a breath of relief. She looked at Emily, as if needing one final reassurance. Emily smiled through the sting of tears in her own eyes. "You're going home, sweetheart." And for the first time since she had walked into the hotel, Sophie truly smiled. The next 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Sophie sat close to Emily, her small fingers clutching the edge of her sweater, eyes flickering toward the door every few seconds. The warm cocoa had gone untouched, but Emily didn't press her to drink. She knew the little girl's mind was somewhere else, counting the seconds until she saw her mother again. Officer Riley kept checking her phone, giving quiet updates. "She's almost here. She just pulled up outside. She's coming in now." Then, at last, the door to the hotel lobby swung open. A woman rushed inside, her breath ragged, eyes frantic. Her auburn hair was unkempt, her clothes slightly wrinkled as if she hadn't slept in days. The moment she saw Sophie, she froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Sophie whispered, "Mommy," and the woman broke. "Sophie," she sobbed, sprinting forward, collapsing to her knees as she pulled her daughter into the tightest embrace. Emily felt her throat tighten as Sophie melted into her mother's arms, burying her face in her shoulder. The child's tiny body shook, but this time, it wasn't in fear. It was relief. Safety. Home. "You're okay?" her mother cried, stroking her hair, kissing her forehead between gasping sobs. Oh, my baby. I thought I lost you. I thought. Her voice broke completely as she held Sophie even closer, as if she'd never let go again. Sophie clung to her just as tightly. I was so scared, Mommy, she whispered. He took me. I didn't know where I was. Her mother's arms tightened. I know, baby, but you're safe now. You're safe. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, as if the weight of the moment demanded silence. Emily wiped at her eyes, not even trying to hide the tears that had slipped out. Officer Riley approached gently. Mrs. Lawson will need to get a full statement from you soon. But right now, all that matters is that Sophie is back where she belongs. The woman nodded, her lips pressing against Sophie's temple. Then, she lifted her gaze to Emily. You saved her, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You? She shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't even know how to thank you. Emily smiled through her own tears. You already have. Sophie peeked up from her mother's embrace, her small voice breaking through the quiet. Emily? Emily knelt down, brushing a tear from Sophie's cheek. Yeah, sweetheart. The little girl hesitated, then reached out her tiny arms. Emily's heart clenched as she pulled Sophie into one last hug. You're going to be just fine, she whispered. As she pulled away, Sophie gave her a look Emily would never forget. A silent thank you, filled with more emotion than words ever could. With one last squeeze of her mother's hand, Sophie was led toward the door. Before stepping out into the sunlight, she turned back one last time, offering Emily a shy, grateful wave. Emily waved back, watching as mother and daughter disappeared into the bright afternoon, together again. As the doors swung shut, Emily let out a deep breath. She had checked in hundreds of guests at this hotel. She had seen people come and go, staying for just a night before moving on. But today she had done something more. Today she had helped bring a little girl home. And she would never, ever forget it.